There. Now all we have to do is open it.
Oh, no, not me. I've had enough monsters for one day. Phew.
I'm not afraid. I'll open it.
I told you it was a mistake.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
Yeah, I'm not scared of no OP cards like Trump. Get out of here. I love Trump. But we do have 10 cards. Maybe a couple are OP. I don't really know. But they're all based on dungeon bosses from World of Warcraft, which are some pretty interesting and intriguing characters and some cool cards to match. So let's jump into it. Up first here I have General Hussam from Faroon, 7 mana, 6/8. Neutral legendary with the battle cry, destroy your quest, and then draw a card for each step you had completed, which I think is a really cool mechanic. We have these quests being implemented with Saviors of Uldum. We have some old legendary quests as well. And with a card like this, you can suddenly say, well, I don't know if my quest reward is worth it. I'm kind of just desperate for some card draw, and this is a really nice minion attached to, you know, potentially 4, 5, 6 cards. We don't know how many steps some of these quests are going to have, but depending on the class, it could be just a really big dump of cards in hands, a ton of resources, while also getting some stats to still influence the board. So like a super sprint, but with a bit of a sacrifice of long-term upside with your quest, and also just the fact that you kind of maybe spent some mana or wasted some resources along the way trying to complete that quest, compromise your deck. So there is a little bit of a trade-off here. This isn't all upside, but you might have some decks that don't really care about the quest reward at all, just still run a quest in order to run General Hussam. Other decks might run this as kind of a backup plan, like if you're playing a matchup where your quest reward isn't really all that important, you could dig for a couple extra brawls instead, for instance, and just try to find some resources or immediate influential sort of cards. It could be great for combo decks. So a lot of different ways to use this with some intriguing implications on whether or not it'd be worth it. I like cards like that that give you tough decisions to make, but still have some pretty high power output as long as you're willing to take on some of that risk. So moving on here, we have Scourge Lord Tyranus from Sparkanarius, a 6 mana 2/6 for Mage with a neat little battle cry. You choose an enemy minion, and if that minion survives until the start of your next turn, then you summon Rhymefang. So Rhymefang is an 8 mana 4/8 dragon with Rush, but also whenever this attacks a minion, you freeze that minion and adjacent minions. So very powerful effect on Rhymefang. You could basically lock down a big portion of your opponent's board, and then also in total you're just looking at a big old pile of stats between these two minions too, creating a very high friction scenario for your opponents whenever you use your Scourge Lord Tyranus. So basically this is, you know, going to have 2 attack by design. That's clearly a very weak stat line for a 6-drop in and of itself, but that's so that it's harder for your opponent to trade off that minion that you have targeted, thereby ensuring that it will actually survive and allowing you to summon your Rhymefang. But if they have other easy ways to do that, then you could get punished and only play a 6 mana 2/6, which certainly isn't worth much. So you create this scenario where your opponent suddenly has to think in a different way, like, how do I get some value out of this minion? How do I sacrifice it? Am I just stuck? Do I get ready for Rhymefang? I like those kind of moments. Now, I do think this could be a little bit punishing in some ways for some decks, like Rhymefang would just be so good at locking them out for a turn or two. There could be some balance concerns here, but my hope is that it is a legendary, so it's just a one-of in your deck. It's not something that's happening all the time. Metas can adjust around it. Some decks will have perfect answers for it anyway, or minions that Scourge Lord Tyranus just doesn't want to target in the first place. Plus, just the mere fact that you're kind of intentionally leaving a minion up on your opponent's side of the board, it's a pretty big downside in and of itself. Like, you're just going to have to deal with that minion. It's going to get some extra damage. It's going to take another value trade with something else. It's going to take a value trade with Tyranus itself. So you're leaving some downside for yourself to counteract a lot of this upside with Rhymefang as well. And what that means to me is that, balance aside, maybe it's balanced already. Even if it's not, I think the mechanic is just such a cool idea. I think it's fine anyway. So moving on here, we have Lord Serpentis from King Kuba, 8 mana 7/9. Battle cry, shuffle 5 random legendary beasts into your deck. So we have here a deck extension tool, kind of like Archivist Elysiana, maybe Elise the Trailblazer, just preventing fatigue for a few turns, but also adding some additional resources. The interesting part for Lord Serpentis is that you could play this at any point in the game, unlike Archivist Elysiana, that is generally better if you're playing her when you're on fatigue. This is not replacing cards, it is merely adding extra ones in, and if you think that a random legendary beast is going to improve the quality of your draw on average, then yeah, you can go ahead and play this a little early. I mean, technically you can play Elysiana early too, but usually you don't. This one might be a little more apt to be playing early. There's not as much downside because you're still retaining that fatigue extension. Now, when you look at the legendary beast pool for a card like this, there are some great options, you know, just very powerful things, just good minions. There's also some stuff that could backfire, like Hyreek the Bat, for instance. Maybe you're not too excited about that. Some of the Loas, for instance, are good. Some aren't so good. So it's a mixed bag here on what you're going to get, but it's still a pool where you have a little bit more control over it than just a random legendary. So you can have higher expectations that you're going to see the sorts of things that you care about, particularly if you have some kind of beast synergies in your deck, which there are still some unexplored beast synergies that were introduced in Druid with Rosticon's Rumble that a card like this could certainly help fulfill, like drawing a beast from your deck and doubling its health. Those sorts of things could be pretty fantastic with a card like this. So I like that this supports Beast Druid. I like that this is a fun anti-fatigue card. It's just a big fun legendary in general because random beasts are cool when they're legendaries. So this gets a lot of things right from both flavor and design, making it a pretty cool card. Moving on here, we have Azumat the Blight, a card from Spectre Dragon that's a 10 mana 6/7 beast for Shaman. And it reads, Battlecry, destroy all other minions and summon 2/1 Murlocs with Rush to replace them. So this is definitely a dude who's disrupting things with a nautical theme here. Murlocs, in fact, which we know are a pretty big Shaman thing these days, so a good fit there. But what we've got is just this big board wipe, and this is not a transform effect like we've seen with Plague of Murlocs in Saviors of Doom, so this would be activating things like Death Rattles, but it is just a big way to reset things. So for instance, if both sides of the board are full, everybody can just trade into everybody, and outside of Death Rattles, you've got a clean slate except for Azumat himself. You know, he's a big 6/7. If you have, say, a few random totems you don't care about, which I think is the primary use case for this card that aren't getting you a lot of value, you can play Azumat and you can suddenly turn those totems into 2/1s and take some really nice trades into your opponent's stuff. And then sometimes just, you know, if your opponent has a big board of mountain giants, you just kill the mountain giants and you're happy to make them 2/1s because they're far less threatening. So all kinds of board states, whether symmetrical or asymmetrical in either direction, could still benefit from a card like Azumat the Blight. In a lot of ways, it's a twisting nether. In others, it's even more advantageous for you. So a pretty neat little design here that also just seems to capture the chaos of a gigantic sea kraken like this. This kind of feels like the sort of thing he would do. So moving on here from dropping those excuses, we have another Druid minion, Gorac Tool, a 5 mana 4/5 with Battlecry. The next minion you play this turn costs 1 less for each turn you ended with unspent mana this game. So I know that sounded a little bit like a mouthful, but it actually does make sense. So much like we've seen with the card Untapped Potential, the new Druid Legendary Quest, this one is all about unspent mana synergy. So if you had 3 or 4 turns where you left some unspent mana, much like with Untapped Potential, play Gorac Tool on turn 5. If you had, say, 4 turns thus far where you left over some mana, you floated some mana, then you get a 4 mana discount on whatever minion you play. So you can get this instant infusion of stats, essentially. And I mean, if you go towards turn 10 and you've had 10 turns with unspent mana, then guess what? The next minion you play this turn is going to cost 10 less, which means you could, say, play a Malygos for 0 mana alongside a 4/5 and then still have like a swipe and a couple Moonfires left. So you've got here a card that can both be kind of a mid-game tempo infusion sort of card, but also a late-game combo setup kind of card, but one that does demand you to waste a fair bit of mana if you want that to work. So as always, cards I like with a little bit of give and take, a little bit of self-balancing happening here. For this to be good, you kind of have to suck along the way. So you have to decide how to play the game in a way that's going to support your Gorac Tool without, you know, totally compromising your game state and losing along the way. And I like that a lot. I think this is super cool, and it can be played in 2 different directions, and it's a fun mechanic here that also references what we're seeing in Savers of Uldum, so a lot of nifty stuff going on with this card. Moving on to Akamai The Devourer from Imaginary MDA, a 6-mana 3/2 that reads, after a friendly minion dies, gain its stats. So here we've got a card that really encourages trading on the board. And we've had a few of those before where if you trade in your minions, you can do some pretty cool stuff. Things like Sonia's Shadow Dancer, for instance. I guess Cult Master draws you cards, but this one gives you a big old scary threat, right? So if you just trade in like a 5/5, for instance, after playing Akamai the Devourer on the board, because remember, this has got to be on board, it's not in hand. That means you're already at 8/7 for a 6-drop, which is certainly above stat. You can trade in like a 5/5 and a couple 2/2s, like suddenly, whoa, this thing is going to be a big, crazy monster that could continue growing. And you can even use things like rush minions or charge minions to instantly give this thing some stats as well, so that it's not just sitting out there chilling. But with a card like this, it can be a bit of a win more card in that you kind of have to have stuff on board already if you want it to work well. It has to be friendly minions that are dying, not enemy minions, which means you are trading in your own resources to buff this guy, but those trades or those resources are generally going to pay off anyway if you're trading in a sensible way. So it's kind of like you're doubling the value of those stats of your minions on board and able to buff this guy. But of course, you got to get at least a little bit to get this to a reasonable stat level, which I think was good. If this had been a 6-mana 5/5, it wouldn't have felt as good to me, but the fact that this is understatted at its base and you really have to do a little bit of work to snowball it, I think that's important for a card like this, and shows a real touch of consideration from the designer that they didn't want this one to be absolutely nuts. Now, is this card good? I'm still not actually sure it's that good. Against some decks, it certainly could be, but it's so very susceptible to single target removal. A lot of decks could just push through this thing, no problem. Silences are the same story. It doesn't have taunt or anything, so it's often just kind of sitting there. And I think that means it's a scary, interesting card, if not necessarily one that's overpowered, although it could certainly get really big, and that'd be very, very fun to see, and that makes it awfully cool. So up next here we have Gamu Ra from Captain Davy, a 4-mana 2/7 beast, again for Druid. We don't normally see this many Druid cards, but this fellow has a battle cry that reads, deal 3 damage to all enemy minions that attacked your hero last turn. And you'll note this is the Oasis Snapjaw stat line and cost, which I think is a nice touch since it is another turtle here. But a very cool battle cry that punishes your opponent for hitting you in the face, which so many of us hate when we're playing control decks and we want to stabilize. Hitting us in the face sucks, but this allows you to punish that behavior. And a card like this existing creates some really cool moments, I think, in Hearthstone, where your opponent's like, shoot, I have, some 3 health minions here and a couple 4 health minions. I'm going to attack with the 4 health minions, but if he has Gamu Ra, I don't want to attack with my 3 health minions because they might die. But maybe 6 damage is worth it anyway. And you have to think about all these sorts of things. And when do you play Gamu Ra? When's the right time to play it? Do you just take 1 or 2 minions? Do you wait for a bigger turn later? Do you have enough life to save it up and play Gamu Ra? Do you have to do something defensive instead? Like, there's all kinds of questions you have to answer with this card. And that's what's really cool about it. It's a skill rewarding card if you can time it well, and your opponent can sometimes play around it or punish you for holding on to it for too long too. So some really interesting things happen when this card exists, and I like that a lot. Plus, it just seems like a cool control tool for a druid, and it's a turtle that's got this spiky shell. So hey, it's a defensive card that can occasionally lash out if you attack it. That makes sense to me from a fantasy standpoint too. So A+ on this design. All right, up next here we have Captain Cookie, probably the character submitted more than any other, I think, in this review. Apparently a lot of people remember some fun times in the Dead Mines back in the day, like myself. This version comes from Saparki 6, 5-mana 6/2 neutral Murloc. Battlecry, summon a Witch's Cauldron and destroy all other friendly Murlocs. If you don't remember the Witch's Cauldron, that's a neutral card that gives you a Shaman spell anytime a friendly minion dies. So with Captain Cookie, if you have 3 or 4 other Murlocs, he's going to toss those suckers in the Witch's Cauldron. Very fitting to his art here. And he's gonna poop out some spells. You're gonna get some spells in return. So basically this allows you to leverage your board for a shift in focus or game plan. And, you know, if you have a bunch of junk Murlocs around that aren't doing much anyway, this card makes a lot of sense, because we see that even today in Murloc Shaman. This doesn't have to be a Shaman card specifically, but we see that in Murloc Shaman, where sometimes you just get stuck with a bunch of like 1/1 tokens from Soul of the Murloc on board, and you don't have the Bloodlust, you don't have the follow-up damage. So it's just like they're not doing much. They kind of get stuck there. Captain Cookie could help you turn those into 4 or 5 fresh spells. And that kind of shift to a mid to late game plan already happens in that deck with Hagatha and Shudderwalk and the value generated off Underbelly Angler. And I think this could contribute to that game plan really nicely, but also maybe bring it to other classes that could run a Murloc shell as well, and maybe help them find some things they wouldn't otherwise have access to with Shaman spells in another class. Now keep in mind, you're also getting a 6/2 body here, which the 2 health is certainly risky, but still pretty good bundle of stats. And the Witch's Cauldron also has stats too, so you're not just totally sacrificing all of your health. And that minion could pay dividends over multiple turns, because this is only killing the Murlocs. It's not killing the Witch's Cauldron itself. So some potential longer term upside there too. What that means is we have a card here that does capture the feel a bit of Captain Cookie, and I think mechanically speaking touches on Murlocs in a way that we haven't really seen a lot of other things do. Murloc Shaman gets there nowadays through other means, but this would be a way to introduce that across the board, and I think that'd be a pretty cool thing to see. Up next here is Verdon the Ever-Living, an 8 mana 5/5 for Druid again, surprisingly, and this one comes from Iron Shadow, and it just has Reborn 3 times. So I love this idea, and I think I saw a thumbnail for a Trump video too recently where it looked like a card had a lot of Reborn instances, so this may be an idea a handful of people have come up with. But the first and only one I saw in this submission, so I liked it quite a bit too. And I don't know exactly how this Reborn would operate. Presumably what I think would happen is this minion would come back 3 additional times. So, for instance, the first Reborn would be activated. It would come back as a 5/1 with 2 Reborns on the card. When that one died, the second Reborn would activate, and it would come back as a 5/1 with an additional Reborn. And then finally, when that one died, it would come back the last time as a 5/1 without any Reborn. Now, you could read this as when you kill it, it comes back as 3 5/1s immediately. Depending on your interpretation, that does certainly change the power level of the card. For me, I actually think the much stickier version that comes back again and again and again is better. Because think, if you just get 3 1-health minions simultaneously, that only takes like 1 instance of Warpath. Whereas if you get them coming back time after time, that would take up to 4 instances of Warpath instead. And I think that stickiness is where the real value would come out from a card like this. Just being able to take trades turn after turn, you know, going 4 for 1 instead of maybe 2 for 1 with your opponent's resources, and would be a really intriguing card to start to deal with and figure out like, man, okay, I deal with the first 2 halves of this now, then maybe next turn I deal with it this other way, I save a ping, and your opponent has to do all this calculus about how to deal with Verdon the Ever-Living, because it's really sticky and really annoying. Now, I don't know how Druid specifically would use that, but as a class with lots of healing and heal synergies, anytime something comes back with 1 health and could be healed to full, then maybe that's a way to help empower some heal Druid, or at least kind of sideways synergize with heal Druid stuff too, which is just another good fit for the class. So all in all, this is a really intriguing idea and a great way to capture multiple instances of Reborn if that something is possible. This feels like the right flavor, the right class, and the right way to do it. And then finally here from Defen, we have Lord Walden. It wouldn't be a custom card video without some discard Warlock synergy stuff. Thank God we actually got some of that in real Hearthstone too. This one's a 4 mana 4/5, and it reads, whenever you discard a card, add a random Warlock spell to your hand. So here we just have another way to generate additional value from your discards, a bit like what we've seen with the Expired Merchant. Like, that's actually a real kind of thing too. But this does it in a different way, whereas instead of getting the same card back and doubling it, you are getting a spell instead. And I think this is intriguing because, don't forget, there are still a lot of discard your lowest cost cards available from the Rostakon's Rumble discard package. And if you could trade off bad, low-cost cards, think about just random junk minions or just random spells you don't need, and instead turn those into some other spell that might have more upside, right? Like you could turn a Mortal Coil late in the game when you're near fatigue into a Twisting Nether, and you'd be like, oh my god, what a great trade. Now, it's not always going to be a Twisting Nether, but if you know you can't play a Mortal Coil, anything else might just be better. Like a Shadow Bolt could be 1,000 times better than a Mortal Coil in that sort of scenario. So this allows you to take the gamble and take the risk where you can try to get rid of your garbage stuff and turn it into something at least reasonable or playable. And I think that's a cool late game asset and a great way to try to turn discards into something better. Now, would all of that fit together where this and the new merchant card, I don't know if all that would fit nowadays in a new discard warlock deck, but I still like the idea that this is a card that supports the archetype by giving you some additional resources. Instead of giving you like tempo for your discards or immediate influence on the board, which a lot of them have done if you think about things like Doomguard being overstatted and having charge for discard, this just makes sure you aren't running out of stuff and you have the option to trade up, which to me seems like what we might need in a more control-y mid to late game style discard warlock deck. So I think Lord Walden would be a pretty solid fit for that idea. All right, folks, that wraps it up for this custom card review. I know you're curious about next time. I want you to design and submit a minion based on a League of Legends character. Going to capitalize a little bit here on the Teamfight Tactics hype. I'm sure some of you have been playing it. Well, take your favorite character from that or League and make me a minion out of it. If you don't know League of Legends, I'm going to include some references and some resources to help you learn a little bit more about the various characters in the game. In the description below, in the submission form, there'll be a link there. So feel free to go forth and learn and pick a character that has a cool ability or something and try to capture it in Hearthstone. Also, I totally blanked on the fact that we're supposed to do giveaways every 4 videos where you guys vote on your favorite card. So check the description below. I'll also pin it in the comments. I need you guys to go vote. I've picked 10 cards from videos 16 to 20 and 10 cards from videos 21 to 24. No, 17 to 20 and 21 to 24. I think that's how you actually do it for 4 videos each, right? 10 cards from those sections of videos, and I need you guys to vote on your favorite from each, and the person who wins will get a $20 Blizzard gift card. And we'll be doing that in the future too, so videos 25 through 28 will be the next block, which when we get to 28, I'll remind you to do that again. All that said, check out all that in the description comments. It'll all be there, all the details. Thank you so very much for watching, and until next time, game on.